In a world of way too many JavaScript frameworks, I think Astro is one of the ones you should definitely be looking at. Astro started with a focus on content, but now you can use it to build almost anything, and it directly competes with frameworks like Next.js. And Astro just recently launched version 3.0, so I'm going to walk you through a crash course to know everything you need to know about Astro 3.0 going forward so that you can build amazing applications with one of the most exciting frameworks that's out there. All right, so let's start with why you should care about Astro. I'm on the Astro homepage, which has actually been updated with 3.0, and it talks about content sites, powerful web applications, and dynamic server APIs and everything in between. Now, Astro started as a framework for building what are basically static sites or content-generated sites. So it had a really big focus on Markdown and supporting Markdown as a first-class citizen, and a lot of other very neat small details that were really well done for building content websites. But Astro can actually do it all. So you can do statically generated pages, you can do server-side rendering, you can do API endpoints, and so many things in between, as they said. So if you kind of scroll through, they'll give you a couple of examples of what you can do, which is basically anything. And most importantly, Astro has a premier focus on speed. So Astro by default doesn't ship any JavaScript to the browser, which is pretty amazing and directly different in comparison to Gatsby and Next and Nuxt, etc. So it makes it out of the box really, really exciting and fast, but you can also add in functionality by leveraging other frameworks like React, Vue, Svelte, etc. right inside of an Astro application, which honestly is quite mind-blowing that you can do this. So there's lots of different amazing features with Astro. You can kind of look through and read up on this yourself, but we'll go ahead and get started with the Getting Started docs and create a brand new application from scratch. We'll break down the different files and structure of an Astro project, and then we'll get into building a demo blog along the way to show you all the features that you'll need to know. Now, at the end of this, I'll also give you a list of additional features that we won't cover that add amazing additional functionality when building applications in Astro, so make sure you stick around to catch that list at the end. All right, so on the Getting Started page, I'm going to scroll down and we'll copy the command to create a new Astro project. Now, for me, I'm using Node version 18 plus, and I think this is a requirement, so you'll want to make sure that you have this available. And then I'm going to cd into a directory code demos. And if you're curious where I get this like IntelliSense stuff in here, this is with a plugin called Fig that just got acquired by AWS. You should definitely check it out because it's really awesome. All right, so inside of my demos directory, I'm going to paste in the npm create astro latest command. This will use Astro 3.0, and we'll say, yes, go ahead and proceed. And it has this really amazing onboarding animation with their mascot, Houston. I think this is super, super cool. It's going to ask us what directory should we create this in, and I'm just going to create a directory called Astro Crash Course. We can include sample files in here. They also have a blog template, but we're basically going to build that from scratch to show you how everything works. So we'll include the sample files to start. They're going to copy over these files for us. We'll have it go ahead and install all of our dependencies. All right, so it looks like that has finished, and then it's asking if we want to use TypeScript. I'm going to say yes. I'm a big fan of TypeScript. Let me know yes or no. Are you a TypeScript fan in the chat? I'm really curious because I think a lot of people love TypeScript, but some people still dislike it. So let me know what you think in the chat. In this case, I'll choose strict mode for TypeScript, and then we can initialize a new Git repository for this as well. So that animation is done. They actually give you a little bit of insights into something that we will do in this crash course, which is to add support for React and or Tailwind using the plugins ecosystem with Astro. So we will use Svelte instead of React, but we will use Tailwind. So we'll get to that in a minute. And then I'll go ahead and open this. So -R opens this project inside of the current directory that I'm in, or the current VS Code window that I'm in, and I'm going to open the Astro Crash Course folder. So we'll get that open. I don't need to, I guess I can go ahead and update all my ZSH. Great, thank you. And then we can just run npm run dev in here. Now, one thing to know is the default port for Astro is 4321. As in like 4321 takeoff, Astro, astronauts, spaceships, etc. Anyway, they're playing into the whole thing, which I think is really cool. Also, inside of VS Code, I have a Houston plugin, and this just gives a animated smiley or frowny Astro mascot Houston based on if your code is running successfully or not. So I think this is really neat, but I've got that plugin there. All right, so let's open up this running application. And we'll open this at 4, 3, 2, 1. And here's the basic Astro stuff that they give you to start. So let's dive into these files and look a little bit at what is there. So one of the things that is most important with Astro is they have a built-in routing through the pages directory. So any file that gets added to pages directory will be run or hosted as a new page. So the index page is the home page. So when we go to just the root of 4321, this is what's going to show up. And we'll go and update all this content in a minute. But we have all of this markup, and then we also have style tags down here as well. Now you can kind of love it or hate it. Maybe we're going to move into using Tailwind instead of this, but you have your style tags right inside of your Astro components, which I think is really nice to have the flexibility to do this. Also, these styles are scoped specifically to this component. So this is a page component. All of these styles are only going to apply to this specific component. So if we actually come and look at this, notice that under main, the class that's associated with this has some like really long class that doesn't mean anything to us. That is the Astro framework taking care of scoping these styles to the specific component by adding in that metadata to the class. So that's how they take care of that. But you can do your styles right inside of here. You can have your markup right inside of here. And then at the top, you basically have JavaScript. Now this is inside of these 3 dashes, and this is where you're going to run all of your JavaScript for each different component. Now, one important thing to note with Astro by default is all of these pages are going to be statically generated. So if we run a build of this, and we can actually do this. So if we run a build of this, it should run pretty quickly, just one file. You see the output is an index.html file and a favicon SVG. So that got copied over. So inside of HTML, it's going to be all minified. We can't really read that. But I do have a plugin that I can open this with Live Server. And this actually opened in a different browser window in Google Chrome instead of Arc, but that's okay. So the thing I want to show you is if we go into Inspect and go into the Network tab and do a refresh while we're filtering on JavaScript, there's no JavaScript that's actually being pulled in here, which is one of the core features of Astro for why it's super fast is because you don't get any JavaScript by default. Now you can add JavaScript anywhere that you need it, but this is a really cool use case for why this is super fast and super performant. So in addition to our page components, we also have layout components. And these are going to be layouts that are wrapping information inside of our application. So in this case, you can see we have a little bit of JavaScript up here, and we're able to define what sort of properties an individual component is going to accept. In this case, we define an interface of props. Then from the astro.props, we destructured that property. So I love that we have the ability to define those interfaces right here and then get reference to those properties from Astro props. Then we can reference these properties inside of brackets like you're probably used to in a lot of different languages or frameworks. And then we also have the ability to include the information from a given page, for example, as the slot. So basically what happens is when we wrap all of this content with that layout component, this ends here. Sorry for all the scrolling. This is the child of this layout component, and then we can display that by using our slot. And then lastly, we have additional styles down here, and notice these are marked as global styles. So previously we saw scoped styles for a given component. In this case, these are global to apply in every piece of our application. So we have our pages, we have our layouts, and then we use our layouts to wrap the content inside of our page. And then additionally, we can have components. So Astro components, we can define whatever we want. In this case, this is a card. Again, we define props, we destructure those props from astro.props, and we can reference these things all inside of here. Now, again, all of this is just static content. There's no JavaScript running on the browser. We will use some JavaScript by creating a component with Svelte here in a minute to show you how to bring that in and to show you that it's possible, but all of this stuff is static by default. So let's take a look at what we're actually going to build. Now I have a demo running at localhost 3000, and this is the full demo for my Astro course that I've been working on. And this goes really in depth where we have authentication, we have blog posts, featured blog posts, recent posts, tags on a blog post page. We have all of our content. If we scroll down, we have comments in here. We have tied that to authentication. We also have a share component. We have a table of contents up here. And we also have, if we go to our blog page, we also have pagination built in for this as well. So if we scroll down to the bottom, we can see we have a next button to get to the next series of pages. So there's a lot built into this. So what we're going to do is a very minimal version of what you see here. If you're interested in learning how to build all of this, including doing authentication, integrating with Zeta, automatic cover images with Cloudinary, SSR, endpoints, API endpoints, newsletter subscribes, all that stuff, you can find it at astrocourse.dev. So again, what we're going to do in this crash course is a minimal version of this. If you want the full thing, you can go and find this at astrocourse.dev. All right, so let's go back to our application and let's start to kind of clean up what's here. One thing, we don't need this card component, so we can delete that. We can remove it from our layout. Inside of our layout, I'm going to get rid of all of this content. We'll kind of build this from scratch. Now, one thing we will do is kind of copy over some snippets. So we don't need to build everything from scratch. So I will copy over some snippets specifically with styles and Tailwind. So you'll see as we go along, but we'll make sure to talk through everything that we copy over. And then inside of our styles, we'll get rid of those styles on the index page. We'll also get rid of all of these styles on the layout. And now we're able to kind of start from scratch with what we're doing so that we can build this up ourselves. Now, the first thing I want to do is install Tailwind. So if we come to the Astro docs, one handy thing that you can do is Command K to pull up a search. And if I just search in here for Tailwind, there is an integration in Astro for Tailwind, which gives you one command to install Tailwind using npx astro add. So they have this for a lot of different things. We're going to use this for Tailwind. So we can run this command. It's going to do a few things. It's going to ask us if we want to install the Tailwind CSS package. We say yes or Y. That's awesome. And then it's also going to create the Tailwind config file so that we don't have to do any of that stuff ourselves. And then additionally, it's going to update the Astro config file to say that we're actually going to use that plugin. So if we look inside of the Astro config file, it's saying we're going to use the Tailwind integration. If we look inside of the Tailwind config file, here's the config that we will update in a little bit as we work with this, but now Tailwind should be working in our application. So let's just take a look at what this looks like now. There's not going to be a lot here. So let's run this again inside of our H1 or inside of our index. Let's just say this is going to be Rhythm Nation blog. That's kind of the demo that we end up building. So this should look very basic and kind of raw, and we'll need to come in and fill in all the gaps. So after this refreshes, there is what we have, and we can test to see if Tailwind is working by giving this just one style at least. So text for XL should make this a lot bigger, and there you have it. So we have Tailwind configured in our application. We're kind of starting from scratch, and we're going to build out several pages, including all of our blog posts. All right, I'm going to go into our layout, and I'm going to copy and paste in a snippet to kind of replace what's here. So not much has changed, but we do have a few additional things. We're referencing a header and footer component, which we'll come back to. Then we've updated our props to accept not just the title, but also description and an image. And then we have default properties for each one of these. Now notice this is referencing an image that is missing. So we'll actually come back to that in a minute. And then inside of our HTML, we have basically the same thing, except now we are giving some styles to our body. And then we have a header, a footer component, and then reference our slot. So we need to go into our components directory and actually create the header and footer. So let's go into the header.astro, and I'll paste in a snippet here as well. So in this case, what we have is our header. We then have the image component, which we'll come back to in a second. And then we have a couple of links at the end of this for home, about, and blog. So let's save that. And then we should have one additional component that we're missing, which is our footer. So this footer is going to be even more simple, where it just has some background color, a little piece of text, etc. So now this should at least display. We see we have this missing image over here, so we'll need to fix that. So let's go back to our application. And what you can do is in the GitHub repository, I'll show you a few different times where you might do this. There's a few things that you might need to copy over to be able to follow this demo. So in this repo, under the public directory, there's the heartbeat.png, and then under the images tab, we're going to copy over all of those images as well. So I have these ready to copy over. So again, you'll have to download these from that GitHub repository, but I'm going to copy the heartbeat image there. So there's the heartbeat. And then additionally, we're going to copy over an images directory that has all of these images that we'll use for our blog post in a minute. So you can see that we have all of these referenced here. And notice inside of our layout, we are referencing a default image of images / and then band.jpg, which is this one right here. So again, you can go and grab all those sample files, and then we should now see in here that this image is showing up. We have our nav working. We don't have these pages created yet, so we'll come back to that in a second. But we do have the home page, but this is missing a little bit of styles as well, because we should kind of center that and make it go in the middle of the page for the main content. So what I'm going to do is create a new component in Astro, main.astro. And then I'm going to paste in another snippet, again, with just some styles with Tailwind. So we're setting padding on the X side. We set a max width, and then we're centering this to go in the center of the screen. So now that we have that component inside of our layout, we can reference that main component and then surround all of our content with it. We'll need to import this main component from components directory, and we'll import main. And then now this should look a lot better in here. Now, one additional thing that I did in the final example, just so we can reuse this, is create an h1.astro component. Need to make sure that's named correctly as Astro. And then I will copy over this one as well. So this one is relatively simple. We take one property, which is our text. We destructure that, we render it, and then we have our basic styles for our H1. So inside of our index page, we can now replace our manual H1 by referencing that H1 tag, set the text to Rhythm Nation blog, and then we'll need to import this as well. So we'll import the H1 from our components directory, H1, and then we can get rid of the one that we manually did ourselves. And this should have all the styles and things that we want. So we now have the core kind of layout components. We have our root layout, we have our main component, and then we have our header and our footer. But these are now linking to pages that don't yet exist. So we can now create a new page just by creating another component, Astro component, inside of our pages directory, about.astro. And then I can kind of copy over everything from the index page, and we can go and update this. So this title should be about Rhythm Nation blog. And then we can update this text as well, just to differentiate this. So we'll say about, we can have a p tag. This is all about this blog. It's awesome. Doesn't really matter what you put there. But now we should have an entirely different page that automatically is hosted or handled for us by Astro just because it's in this pages directory. So from here, we can navigate to and from this pages directory. So we can go to the about page, see that change. We can go home, about, and then our blog page still doesn't exist, which we'll get to in a minute. All right, so that is working really well. Now I want to take a quick second to talk about one feature in Astro that is basically brand new, and it is the transitions API or view transitions. And this is the ability to kind of have JavaScript take over on the front end and add really beautiful transitions between one page and another. This is something that I kind of question how difficult this would be to implement in my application, but it's literally as simple as importing this component and then using that to display either inside of individual pages or a root layout, which is what I do here. So let's go into our layout component, and I'm going to see if I can get auto import in this. Yeah, so view transitions. I'm just going to add this component right inside of the head, and we can see this auto import came from Astro:transitions. We'll save this, and now look at what we get. From here, when we transition from home to about, you'll see that we get this like kind of fade in effect. That's really, really neat. Astro is now taking care of this for us by kind of rendering this and staying on the browser to be able to switch between different pages. This is built on top of core browser APIs. Astro just wraps this in a really neat way so that we can add view transitions to our applications and make them look really, really pretty with basically no work. All right, with all of that in place, let's start to work on this blog page. So to start, we can create a new page, and we can just kind of copy and paste one of these if we want and just call this blog. And we'll say this is the blog page, and then update this to just keep Rhythm Nation blog. And we can actually get rid of the p tags. We'll add content to this in a second. So now we should have blog, about, home, about, blog. So we have our blog page, and now we actually want to start working with blog content. Well, one of the interesting things that we haven't done yet is we can actually use Markdown directly inside of our pages directory. So if I say something like blog1.md and I say h1, this is a blog. What's really interesting, this is not the most practical thing, but this actually does work as a page. So if I go to blog 1, this is actually going to render this page. But notice that I'm missing all the layout stuff that we've been building. So even though this is cool and you can add pages as Markdown, we're actually going to do this a much different way. And we're going to use something called content collections. So inside of Astro, you can search for content collections. And this is by far, I think, one of my favorite features. It's the ability to define types and organization for your content. So if we come down to defining collections, you can set up TypeScript types for your collections, which tell it which types of data it should have in its front matter and make sure that it abides by those rules. And then you get TypeScript IntelliSense for each of those blog posts as you interact with them in your application. So what we'll need to do is come back into our source. We'll create a new folder called content. And then inside of content, which is a special directory, this is one that Astro is already specifically looking for this name. We'll create our config.ts. Now I'm going to copy over this configuration and we'll talk through it. So inside of here, I'm not sure why this is showing up as not found. This is actually going to work, so you can probably disregard that. But from our Astro content, we're going to import define collection and Z. Now Z is representing Zod, and Zod is a way to basically define schemas for data and then leverage that inside of TypeScript. So there's a lot that you could read up to learn about Zod. In this case, what we're doing is defining individual properties for what's considered a post collection. And then we export all of our collections at the end of this. So you could have collections for blog posts or talks that you've given or authors, whatever you want, you can store in Markdown or MDX content. We'll get to that in a second. And you can define your schemas just like this. So we call the define collection function and we pass it a config object here. We set the schema to a z.object, and then we define each property that we're going to work with. So we have an author, a date, an image, and a title. And then we export this. Now, what's really important is whatever this key is that you export with, that should be the name of the folder, which we'll put inside of content, where all of your post Markdown content should live. So those two things should match. And then when we query content in a minute, we'll also use the same key to query that content and get all of our records so that we can display them on our blog post. So what I'm going to do is copy in some dummy Markdown posts on this GitHub repo that you'll have the link to. You can get these from source, content, and then post. So if you come and look at that page, you can download all of those Markdown files and add them into your repo to follow along exactly like I'm doing. So inside of post, I will paste all those in. We actually have one in here that is MDX. I'll update that to MDX in a minute. And I actually want to get rid of some of the stuff. I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll get rid of that and just go back to regular Markdown. So each of these blog posts has a few different extra things than actually what we're tracking, but that's okay because we do more with this data in the paid course at astrocourse.dev if you're interested. But you can see the core things of what we've been using. We have the author, we have the date, we have the image, and the title. Now notice that that data matches up exactly with what we define inside of our schema for our post collection. So content is a specific directory that Astro is looking for. The Astro config file is a config file that Astro is specifically looking for. And then this key should match up with the folder where all of that content is. So what we can do is come into our blog page and start to query all of that content that we just created with some built-in APIs in Astro. So we're going to need to import a function called getCollection, and this is going to come from, import this from Astro content. All right, and then inside of here, we're going to now query all of our posts by calling getCollection. And then we want to give it the key of the data that we're looking for, which is our post collection. So this is going to query all of those posts, and we can try to log these out, but we'll see something a little interesting here that you may not expect. Also, we see this is logging out a promise. That's because this is asynchronous, so we need to await that response. Now, what's interesting is if we come into the browser to our blog page and refresh, we don't see anything logged out here. And that's because all of this is happening on the server, and this is building a static page. So it's going to, at build time, query all of this content, use it however we need to, and then have that source HTML just ready to be displayed. It's not making a query in the browser, it's happening on the server. And that's why we're seeing this inside of our server logs in here. So it's important to know where things are happening, server versus browser. Now from here, we're going to create a couple of additional components. We'll have a post list component, and inside of this, I'm going to copy over what we're doing here. So we're going to import a post component that we haven't created yet. But what we're going to do is pass into this a prop of posts. And then based on those collections that we defined in Astro, we can actually reference the type of that. That's going to match what is inside of our config here. So we say for a collection entry of type posts, we're going to actually have an array of those. So we have a reference to our posts, and then we use Tailwind and CSS Grid to display them by iterating through each one and then referencing a post component that we haven't created yet to actually display that post. So we'll go ahead and copy that in. So we'll have our post.astro. And there's a little bit more involved in here. So let's go through. We take a property as a post, and we accept our props that has a property of post. And again, it's of type collection entry of type post. We reference that, and then we just kind of spit out HTML. We have this image component that we'll come back to. We'll talk about that in a second. We have a link to that individual blog post by referencing the slug from the blog. We're able to reference the front matter from these blog posts. So front matter is the stuff that is listed up here. We can reference that based on post.data. So data.title, body, etc. So the body is going to be the actual markdown content that's in here. So in this case, we're actually using a Tailwind CSS class, line clamp 2. This will actually display only the first 2 lines of that body content to kind of give a preview of what's there. But this is all we need now to be able to display a list of our blogs on our site. So back inside of our blog page, we can now import our post list component and then pass in our post as this post variable. So we've queried all of these posts. We're passing it down to these components that are then responsible for rendering these. So let's come back over and see what this looks like. And we can see we have each of our posts displayed here. We can scroll through them, and then each one is going to link to a page that doesn't exist yet. We'll come back to that and generate each of those pages for each one of those blog posts in a second. Now, one of the things I do want to mention though is the Astro image component. So if we look at how we rendered this, we're using an image component that comes from Astro assets. And with this image component, we see a few different things. We can specify the width and the height. And then most importantly, we can specify the format. And this allows this image component to do some optimization for us to transform these images, but that won't quite work in a second, as we'll see. Now, one change I'm going to make is change the width and height to be 600 and 600 divided by 1.5, because all of these cover images and the grid are going to be a little bit smaller than full width, so they don't need to be full width. So let's go and actually see what happens when we load this page. So as we load this, one thing we'll notice is we're only loading 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 images. And as we scroll down, we see we're loading more images. So one of the things that is done for us is each of these images is lazy loaded. So this is added automatically using this component. But the other thing we'll notice is that these are not importing these images as WebPs. They're still using their original JPEG format, which is not what we want. And that's because in Astro 3.0, it's not able to do those transformations from images that come from our public directory. Now, what we can do is move each of these images into our post directory. So just drag that folder and then move all of those images into our post directory. And then inside of our markdown files, we can reference our images from the current directory that we're in. So if we do a global search, let's make this a little bit bigger. If we do a global search for /images/, this should bring up each of these markdown files, and we can go in and replace this with ./images/. So what this is going to say is look inside of the current directory that we're in, which is inside of the content directory, and then inside of its images folder, and then you can find the appropriate image. Now, one of these will need to get updated in this layout, so we'll come back to that. Let's go and change all of these and then come back to our layout file. So let's open up our layout file, and we can use this as the root URL. And it looks like these images still aren't found, so we're missing something. So this would have worked in previous version of Astro, but now we need to update our config for our schemas to be able to reference these images. So instead of schema being an object directly, we're going to have this be a function that then returns that object. And then inside of this function, we can destructure a property called image. And then instead of using a string property, we're going to use this as an image property specifically. And that way it'll be able to process our images and get the optimizations that we're looking for. So we can call this image function and then save, and then hopefully it will now be able to find those images. So if we scroll over to our application, we can see these are all loading. We still have them asynchronously loaded or lazy loaded, so we don't load them until they're necessary on our page. And then also we see our format is updated to WebP, and these file sizes are much, much smaller than what they were previously. So now we're able to get lots of image optimization from using this image component with images that are embedded in our source code. Now, the next thing that we want to do is actually create the dynamic pages for each one of these individual blog posts. So to do that, we can define a dynamic route in Astro by coming into not our content directory, but our pages, and we can create a folder called blog, and then we'll create a dynamic route by using bracket syntax and slug. So what slug is, it's a key for that property or that property of the path of where we are for each individual blog post. So based on that slug, we will query the actual blog post from Astro and then use that to display that specific type of blog post. So let's open up our JavaScript snippet in here. And one of the things that we'll need to do is export a function, get static paths, that's going to be an asynchronous function. And in here, what we want to do is define what each one of these paths are and what sort of content is going to go with that path. So we'll start by querying all of our posts. So we'll do await, and then we'll use our get collection function, and we'll need to import this above. So we'll import get collection from Astro content, and we're going to get all of the blog post content. Now from there, we need to actually generate the paths that this function is going to use to be able to display our content. So we'll create this from our post, and we'll map through each individual post. And then for each post, we want to return an object. So we'll return an object in here that has basically two different properties, a params property, and this is going to reference the slug, and it's going to come from the slug of the individual post. This should be singular. So post here. So post.slug. And then we'll also have a props field, which is going to define what we're passing into that individual page. And what we want to pass is the individual prop. So we're going to match based on the slug here, and then we're going to pass in the property of the individual blog post so that we can display this on the page. So we can define our props in here. So our props will have one property, and it's of type collection entry of type posts. And then we'll need to import our collection entry as well. So this is going to come from the Astro content. So we'll import collection entry. And now we are saying that's the one property that's going to get passed into this individual page. And then we can destructure the post from there. So from astro.props. And then we're going to need a base layout in this. So I'm just going to copy from our pages directory. I'm going to copy this part here. So we'll have kind of our base layout, and then we can get our imports. So those should all get imported if I do this correctly. And then for this H1, I want this to be the title of the blog post that we're working with. So we can reference the post.data.title. All right, so we'll reference the title of this. Then we also want to add a reference to the image as well. So we'll import that image component from assets. We'll set the source of this to post.data.image. We'll set the alt to reference the title, so post.data.title. We'll set the width to 1024, the height to 1024 divided by 2. We'll set the format as WebP, and then we'll have a few classes in here as well. Then we'll close out that image component. So this will be rounded as 2XL. We'll have a shadow on here of XL, set a margin bottom of 28, and then we'll set an object cover property to make sure this takes up all the available space. So if we now just save this and make sure our application is running, let's go back and see if this page exists. So we can try to refresh on this page. And it looks like we might have not returned inside of our get static paths. So I think the last thing we need to do is make sure that as we define these paths, we then return them. So we can return these paths. That way Astro knows what each individual URL is and to pass those props into the page. And then here is our individual blog post. So we have the title, then we have the image, and now we need to actually display that content. Now Astro actually gives us a way to render this content from the actual blog post. So from the blog post, we can render a component. So this component is going to be the content component, and this is going to come from awaiting post.render. So this is basically going to give us all of the HTML for the content of our post. So we can then render this content component inside of here, and this will give us everything, but it won't look that great. So notice this doesn't style the headers, it doesn't do anything. And this is something that we can fix with Tailwind, which is pretty nice. So we can add a Tailwind typography package and just wrap this and have it take care of all the styling for us. So we'll need to install this package. So npm install, and then we'll have Tailwind CSS/typography. And then we'll need to reference this inside of our Tailwind config. So under plugins, we're going to require the Tailwind CSS typography plugin. And then lastly, we need to wrap our content in a way that's actually going to display it using those classes from Tailwind. So I'm going to copy in a div and we'll wrap this with content. And basically what is happening is we're wrapping this in a div that uses this pros class. Now Tailwind with that class is going to apply all the different styles and things for us. So from here, we can npm run dev. We should now be able to refresh this and notice this actually looks like a good looking blog post, which is pretty nice. So we're able to display a list of all of our blog posts here. Here they are. Then we can click on individual one and we have a route created for each one of these pages that are all created statically. So they're going to be super fast and they have the content, which is displayed really nicely using that typography plugin with Tailwind. All right, let's talk about a few more features that we can add. Inside of the Astro docs, we can work with Markdown, or not Markdown, we can work with MDX in addition to Markdown. So MDX allows us to add JavaScript components right inside of our Markdown files, which is really nice if you want to add like a call out to something in there. So let's see what an example of this is. We can run this npx astro add MDX command. Say yes to everything. This is going to allow us to support Markdown or MDX and Markdown at the same time for all of our content. So all that is done, it added the integration into our config file. Now let's go into one of our Markdown posts inside of content and post, and let's choose the first one and let's just rename this to MDX. So notice we have a different logo up here. All the content stayed exactly the same. So this will work as is. Nothing's going to change just yet. So let's go and look at this and go back to our page and notice this all looks the exact same. So where does this help us? Well, if we were to define a callout component that we want to reference inside of here, we could actually reference this inside of an MDX file. So let's create a new component and we'll call this callout.astro. And I'm going to just copy over this component. So we have two props, a link and a piece of text. We have some styles and then we display that link. Pretty straightforward. And then inside of this MDX file, we can actually import this component. So right up here, we can import callout from, and then we'll go back to directory, into components, into callout.astro. And then now we can use that thing wherever we want. So we can display this right in here. So we'll have callout, we'll have text, learn Astro 3.0. We'll have a link and I can link to my course. So astrocourse.dev, and then we'll close out this callout. So now if we type these paths correctly and do this should load correctly. Nice. And we should be able to see this callout now right inside of our Markdown or now MDX file. So this is a really neat way for you to go in and dynamically leverage whatever sort of components you have right inside of your Markdown files, and you can mix and match Markdown and MDX and then reference these individual components. And hey, this will take you to the Astro course landing page where you can learn the full in-depth version of what we're doing in this crash course. All right, so that was a ton of what we just did. I want to do a quick wrap up and then show you some additional things that you can do that we haven't even touched on inside of here. So we worked with a root layout component. We added transitions in between our different pages. We added Markdown and MDX content. We have individual dynamically generated pages for each one of our blog posts that actually get hosted as a static page when you run a build. Let's actually just see that really quickly. So let's do an npm run build. And then inside of this dist directory, what we'll see is under blog, we have all of our pages created. So each individual index HTML has been created for each individual page, which is super sweet. And so we've done a ton in here. There's also a lot more that you could do. So we mentioned that you could do, for example, Svelte components. If we look inside of here, there's a plugin for working with Svelte. That means you can do an Astro add Svelte, create a Svelte component directly. If you want to see a separate video of that, comment below with Svelte yes below, and maybe I'll make a separate video on that. But you can use Svelte and React and view components right inside of your Astro application, which is really phenomenal, super, super cool. Now, another thing that we didn't even get into is SSR. So all of the things that we've done have been statically generated pages. You also have the complete ability to create server-side rendered pages as well as API endpoints. And this is exactly what we cover in the in-depth course at astrocourse.dev. So if you want to know how to do everything on the server, API endpoints, handling form submissions, generating content using SSR, we can do all that. You will do all that in that course at astrocourse.dev. And then another really neat thing is Astro supports doing pagination, which I talked about earlier. So if you want to learn how to do pagination on your blog posts or whatever data you have, you can do that with Astro, no doubt. And again, I'll just shout out the Astro course landing page where you can go and sign up. This will be available next week. So get ready for this, and it'll be ready for Astro 3.0 as well. So I hope you can tell I'm super excited about Astro and Astro 3.0. I hope you enjoyed the crash course. If you have any feedback on things you'd like to see me do with Astro or build with Astro in the future, let me know in the comments below. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you next time.